Palestinian people are just about to starve to death, all of them. The ones in Gaza, the ones in the West Bank, the refugees who live in Michigan or wherever they live, or Lebanon, they're all about to starve at any second now. That is a bit of an exaggeration, but not much of an exaggeration of how this is being reported and has been reported by the media in the West. Not just in recent days, not just in recent months, not just since October 7th. We've gone over the history of the Palestinians almost starving. It's always imminent. There are always reports saying that it's just about to happen any second. Now, today we're gonna talk about the most recent uh, article that I saw in the Guardian. Now, the Guardian, look, in general, the Guardian. If you're interested in, am I muted? No, Morgan, can you hear me?
I
Susie,
can
I
hear
think
you.
that's on
Yeah.
your end. Yeah. If generally, if you follow, if you're interested in knowing on what's going on in Israel and in Gaza, um, the Guardian is a place where you'll get updates regularly. They're covering it. You'll get a lot of information. The only thing you're not going to get from the Guardian, there's basically only one thing. That's the truth. Yeah, in this case, of course, the Guardian. I guess I don't know if they're working on a certain uh, kind of deadlines or timelines where every now and then, within a certain number of days or weeks, they have to report. Um, they have to report about a famine again or whatever it is. Today, we're gonna read that latest article titled "Humanitarian Operations Near Collapse in Gaza," says World Food Program. So, of course, there's different bodies each time telling us that this is happening. Thank you, PC, for the super chat. PC says the Guardian is nonsense. I agree. Thank you, Jonathan, for the super chat. Morgan, your thoughts on this article before we get into it.
Well, Daniel almost preempted the first thing that came to my mind when I read this article, which is that we've been hearing various reports about famine setting in Gaza for a few months now. And the thing that is never addressed in the next article, which is talking about famine setting in Gaza, is why is it still only just setting in? Why didn't it set in before? And it's reminiscent of the kind of warnings about global catastrophe due to climate change that have been received over the decades. I mean, you mentioned something something about the truth just there. Al Gore's documentary was called An Inconvenient Truth, isn't it? And these articles are almost like an inconvenient truth in that they're predicting widespread catastrophe, and yet the catastrophe keeps seeming to be delayed a little bit further and a little bit further. There was global cooling, and then there's going to be the West underwater by what 2011, and yet it's not just come. And my point isn't to comment about the veracity of climate change or not, but just my point being that people, when it suits them, will make a kind of catastrophist prediction, and then are not held accountable when that prediction doesn't come true, or don't seem to feel the need to explain themselves when it doesn't come true. And you don't see anything in this article from The Guardian which is explaining why their previous predictions, or the people they're quoting previous predictions about famine, why that hasn't set in yet. And although it's I think, dubious, you have to be careful about it, but there's lots of videos which are going around on Twitter of various markets in Gaza, and it's showing that the markets are actually rather full of food, and that's something that's actually mentioned in the article. And whilst you have to be careful about videos that are put on Twitter, if any of them are true, it is not reminiscent of a place where food is scarce. Food is fairly plentiful, and there was complaint about prices going down because there was actually a surplus of food. And there just needs, if someone wants to seriously make a claim about there being a famine in Gaza, they need to have some kind of explanation for that and why that's going on, because that doesn't add up with a famine in any other situation in the world and in where there are famines. So that's something that those are questions people need to be asking themselves when they're reading these kind of news articles.
Yeah. All right. Should we go into the article? I think I had another point there, but I forgot what it was. So let's go straight into it. Yeah. As I mentioned, the title is humanitarian operations, quote, near collapse in Gaza, says World Food Program. And then the sub headline is UN says 1 million people face catastrophic levels of hunger as food aid piles up on Egyptian side of border. So before we even get into the article itself, there was this video a few days ago. I don't have it handy at the moment, but it was a person in Gaza. We'll find it. We'll put it in the description. A person in Gaza walking around. And yeah, as you said, you should be skeptical of these videos, but a person walking around saying, "Look, when we had hundreds of trucks coming in from Egypt, prices in the market were much higher than they are now with like 50 or 60 trucks coming in from Israel. Because when the trucks come in from Israel, they go to not Hamas, whereas when they come in from Egypt, they go to Hamas. So yeah, the markets are reportedly, we again don't have full knowledge of what's going on there. Reportedly, prices are lower. There's no shortage of food, but there is, there is not food coming in from Egypt. So this is an opportunity for the Guardian to report and, of course, use their experts from the World Food Program and the UN. So let's get to the article. The humanitarian crisis in Gaza is set to worsen once again as deliveries of aid and fuel to the Palestinian territory slow to a trickle in the wake of Israel's 2-week-old ground offensive in the southern city of Rafah. The UN has suspended food distribution in Rafah owing to a lack of supplies and insecurity, the world body said late on Tuesday, and delivery operations from the new US-funded floating pier have also been halted after desperate people seized most of the shipment offloaded onto trucks on Saturday, an incident in which one person was killed. Now, all right, we know about these incidents. We've shown videos of such incidents. We know that when they can, this is what the Palestinian people do. They're not civilized people. They're not gonna. Very rarely will they actually trade. In the way that we in the West are used to, and often there will be violence. And of course, there's still enough of Hamas left around that Israel hasn't taken care of to also take part in that. So yeah, those aid shipments are going to where the aid shipments from the aid trucks from Egypt went, which is ultimately the people who, if there is a famine, they are the ones who will cause it. Of course, they are the one who are responsible for it in the first place because they started the war, but they're also the ones depriving food of the Palestinians. Morgan.
I mean, the notable thing that you read out at the beginning there as well was that it's piling up on the Egyptian side. And Egypt is a is a country on the border with Gaza that no one ever seems to want to talk about or talk about their role in any of this. There was an interesting interview that Douglas Murray did with a South African journalist a few months ago now, where the journalist was putting to him that Israel was blockading all of Gaza, was guilty of various kind of war crimes because of this kind of thing. And he pointed out to her, why don't you ever bring up Egypt? Because Egypt also has a fence with Gaza, which actually seems to be more heavily fortified than Israel's is. There's still, from the photos I've seen, there's sort of 2 trenches and kind of, I think, 2 layers of fencing with razor wire, all that kind of stuff. And in these articles, though Egypt is getting mentioned there, the culpability and blame for this kind of thing is always landing on Israel's shoulders. And certainly that's what people are taking away from articles like this. And why is it that people are doing that and not thinking about the responsibility of Egypt for not letting Gazans through its border and all that kind of stuff, which they're certainly blaming Israel for? And it's because Israel is the enemy or is the party that's wanted to be blamed for this kind of thing, even though Egypt is a awful little dictatorship which has an awful record of human rights. And if anyone goes and looks at the transfer of power between its previous leader to Sisi now, it's a terrible country with no kind of real rule of law, which holds the awful leaders it's had responsible for the crimes they've committed. And yet Israel, which is not a country that resembles that, which operates in a very different Western liberal manner, is held culpable for this kind of thing. And so people, you just need to ask, whenever this stuff is coming up, Why is the weight of condemnation and blame never put onto Egypt? And that's because Israel is the boogeyman that people want to demonize. And that's the real point of a lot of the articles that are put out about aid and all kinds of stuff in the conflict.
Yeah, thanks, Bonnie, for the super chat. And yeah, we'll get to the interesting way in which the Guardian, um, you know, makes sure that the facts don't get in the way of what it is they want people, the opinion they want people to come out with at the end of reading this article. So the article continues since the 10th of May, shortly after Israel seized control of the Rafah crossing with Egypt, through which the majority of aid to Gaza flows. Only about 3 dozen trucks have successfully been delivered via the nearby Kerem Shalom crossing, and only about a quarter of the allowed fuel has been delivered since the Israeli operation began. The ongoing fighting means that both Kerem Shalom and Rafah are effectively blocked, and perishable food and medicine is piling up on the Egyptian side of the border. Egypt and Israel have traded blame over a failure to negotiate Rafah's reopening, which has also prevented sick and injured Palestinians from leaving the Strip for treatment elsewhere. And then there's a quote. It is better than before in the market right now. There are bananas and peaches, and the prices are more normal, but we are worried that it will not last, says Mohammed Azaiza, an accountant from Deir el-Balah, which is whose home was destroyed and is now sheltering with his family elsewhere in the central city. The quote continues, there are so many people to feed now. Thousands of people who were in Rafah have come to Deir el-Balah. So yeah, the facts are things are better for the Palestinians. Again, that is something to complain about. It shouldn't be better. They should be paying the price for what they did. But no, things are better, and yet the Guardian can't really avoid that completely in its article, but yet the article makes sure that you don't come away with the opinion, even though it's in there, you don't come away with the opinion that things are somehow better because the improvement is the result of Israel putting more military pressure, doing more militarily, not nearly enough, in my opinion, but more. And Israel does more, means there's less Hamas. Less Hamas means there is a life for, let's say, ordinary Palestinians is better at least by the standards by which we judge good and bad here in the West. I don't know if it's better to them because better for them might be Jews are getting killed and we don't care how we live.
Yeah, I mean, that quote from this guy in Deir al-Balah, you would think that quote is enough to put the whole article itself into doubt as to whether the thrust of it makes sense, because he's saying the things are better in the market, the prices are more normal, and so on. And you might take an obvious conclusion from that, which is that okay, famine is not what's going on here, and yet that's not the thrust of the article. And just going up to the paragraph before that, when you read it out, the first sentence says the ongoing fighting means that both Kerem Shalom and Rafah are effectively blocked. Now, the ongoing fighting is blocking it. And yet again, the weight of responsibility for that is falling on Israel, who did not start the fighting. And when the reports are coming out about some of these crossings being blocked, particularly the one on Israel's side, it isn't because the Israelis are fighting in the crossings and therefore they're getting blocked. It's because Hamas has launched a rocket or an attack onto them, and therefore it's not safe to send this kind of stuff through. That is never again brought up. That is the obvious conclusion of that, which is that Hamas doesn't have the interests of its populace in mind and actually benefits in the PR war if they do start to starve. That's never brought up by publications like the Guardian. And yet that's a very important fact that people should factor into their judgment of the sides in this war. And in fact, again, videos that come out of the trucks in Gaza show Hamas appropriating the trucks once they've come through. We showed one I think a few months ago now, of Hamas fighters actually standing on top of the trucks. But there was one just the other day of people, Gazans, running up to the trucks to seize some of it just off the side, but it being driven by someone who's part of Hamas, driving it away. They aren't these kind of humanitarian workers, although they are to some extent obviously involved in UNRWA, but they aren't these people who are just seizing the trucks and then distributing all the aid to the people. They're taking it away for themselves. because there is nothing that Hamas or Gaza broadly is producing at the moment. And for the Hamas to still have food and fuel for its fighters to continue their war, they have to seize this stuff, because where else are they getting it from? And they have to stockpile it. So I don't even really think, although the evidence doesn't seem to suggest there is a famine going on right now, if a famine were to set in for the civilians in Gaza, it doesn't seem to be because of a lack of willingness, either from Israel actually, or from a lot of the international community to get aid in there. It would be because Hamas is seizing a lot of it and is making use of it for their own purposes. And again, it would suit Hamas actually for their own people to suffer a bit more, so that more condemnation and weight could be put down on Israel.
Yeah, and it's the Palestinians who want Palestinian suffering because they know it results, whether or not it really happens, but certainly if it does happen, or to any extent that it happens, it results in these headlines in The Guardian. It then results in decision makers when it comes to Western countries' policies, reading those articles, thinking that is what is going on, and following through. Certainly, when the information comes from the UN, how can you doubt that? But yeah, I was gonna say, and then Iron Meerkat, thank you for the super chat, kind of preempted what I'm about to say, which is not in agreement with what Iron Meerkat is saying. Iron Meerkat is saying, I'm pretty sure that even El-Sisi thinks that Gaza must be destroyed. That is the president of Egypt. I don't think so. I mean, maybe he thinks that would be for the better, but everything he is doing is, I don't think they're blocking aid or refusing to deliver the aid because they want Gazans to starve. They want because that is the ultimate goal there. The goal is to make Israel look bad, and that helps Israel look bad again for all the wrong reasons. Look, Egypt. The news came out a few days ago about the details of that agreement by Hamas to a hostage deal a few weeks ago, and the fact that Egypt had the Israeli proposal, then changed it without telling Israel, and then got Hamas to agree as intentional sabotage of that deal. So yeah, I think Arab countries, the culture there is not that different from the culture among the Palestinians. It's pretty much the same culture. Maybe with Palestinians, it's a bit more of an emphasis on killing the Jews, but they all generally agree, and they all know how this plays out in the West, and how the useful idiots in the West will do their part. So I think they are happy with this. Judah Lion Club says from a Reuters report, nearly 70% of aid from the U.S.-built pier to Gaza was stolen by the Palestinians themselves. Yeah, that of course is not a surprise. It's off topic, but Frank asks, will we mention the video of the girls who were kidnapped? The video from October 7th. That is the topic of the reality show that follows in just over 10 minutes. Thank you, PC, for the super chat. PC says UN is anti-Jewish. I agree. Okay, let's read some more of this article. So it continues, limited distributions of reduced food parcels are ongoing in central Gaza, said Abir Atefa, a spokesperson for the UN's World Food Program, but the agency's food parcel supplies are expected to be depleted within days. Humanitarian operations in Gaza are near collapse, she said, and if food and other supplies do not resume, quote, in massive quantities, famine-like conditions will spread, end quote. The UN says 1.1 million people in the coastal strip, nearly half the population, face catastrophic levels of hunger, and that the territory is on the brink of famine. Again, for regular viewers of this channel who saw the past videos we did about famine, this is something that comes up every single time. And the reason, and every single time it's nowhere near the truth. And the reason it comes up is because they want, an increase in whatever will help Gazans fight back against Israel's defensive operation in Gaza. It's in different parts of The Guardian, you'll hear things about other things about how Israel, the evil that Israel is doing in attempting to defend itself. And in this part, you'll hear about the fact that some of the terrorists might supposedly be hungry. And of course, it doesn't matter whether or not it's right. What matters is that it leads to the desired policy. And of course, both in Western countries that are supposedly allies of Israel and in Israel, it does lead to the desired policy, which is Israel acting sacrificially and supporting its enemy.
Yes. Well, I think, I mean, as you were saying, and I think I've said before, the article's kind of leading to a note of, well, that the famine is maybe setting in soon. And just given how much reporting of that note there has been, these kind of publications really need to take accountability for the fact of providing some explanation for why hasn't it already set in when you were saying it was about to set in about a month ago or a month before that, and so on. And it isn't like I want to be skeptical about whether famines happen during wartime, because that's a very common situation in which they do set in. So it isn't like it's impossible that a famine could set in Gaza. It doesn't add up to actually what we do know about how much aid has been going in recent months. Even by the UN's own figures, I think in March, it was showing that more aid had been brought into Gaza than had been going in August or September before the war broke out. And that was a fact, again, that doesn't seem to mean very much to people, even though no one was describing Gaza as being on the brink of famine then, and Gaza doesn't seem to produce a huge amount in terms of food outside of that anyway. So just a lot of this doesn't actually add up in any respect, I don't think. And then just for the question that was about Egypt, I was wanting to learn a kind of a bit more about Egypt's relationship with Hamas a few weeks ago. So I read this report that was put out by, I think it was some institute that does, studies on foreign policy and all this kind of stuff. And Egypt seems to have a bit of a complicated relationship with Hamas, where Sisi's government in the mid-2010s at various points would demonize Hamas and criticize them in kind of official propaganda. And then at various other points, they embrace them and they seem to go back and forth. And it seems to be the kind of opposition that there is because Hamas is, the official outgrowth of the Muslim Brotherhood, which is, largely centralized in Egypt. And they produce trouble for the Egyptian government. So when it suits them, they'll oppose Hamas because they want to keep that under control. But then at other times, Hamas is useful for them for keeping order along that area of the border by the Sinai. So I don't view it quite such that Sisi's government wants the destruction of Gaza, or even particularly of Hamas, but they go back and forth in terms of how friendly they are with them. And it's driven much more by, I think, concerns of realpolitik than it is of deep animosity or anything like that.
Thank you, Wes, for the super chat. Thank you, Frank, for the super chat. Frank says the Irish had a potato famine and they feel sorry for the Palestinians. Well, technically both of those things are true, but I don't think that's an excuse. Thank you, Jonathan. I don't think Frank meant it as an excuse. Thank you, Jonathan, for the super chat as well. And okay, so let's get to the 10th paragraph of this article. I counted just because you'll see what appears in the 10th paragraph, and you'll see that the Guardian is, as fair and balanced as the people who came up with the fair and balanced slogan. So it continues. About 1,200 people, mostly civilians, were killed in Hamas's surprise assault of the 7th of October, with a further 250 taken hostages, and about 35,000 people have been killed in the ensuing war in Gaza, according to the Palestinian Health Ministry, which does not differentiate between civilians and combatants. So that's one paragraph. That is one sentence. You can't dedicate a whole sentence to the fact that Hamas started this war. You can mention it, and then of course mention what Hamas says. Now, again, I try to give some credit to the Guardian, but I think they put it in there so that people give them credit for it. This mention of yeah, well, they don't differentiate between civilians and combatants. That actually, that in a sense, that's better than saying the health ministry run by Hamas. But it's still, yeah, this is your only mention. These savages slaughtered Israelis, took hostages, vowed to do it again and again until Israel is eliminated. Israel is taking minimal military action, and you are reporting on some of the results of supposedly that military action, knowing that Hamas is still there and controlling the very things that you're talking about.
And the other aspect of this, which is just an assumption of the article, but which is something which, we've spoken about on the channel, is that what is the appropriateness of aid being allowed to get to the other side in a war, and which Israel is facilitating, no matter how much publications like The Guardian might like to imply otherwise. Israel is facilitating a lot of aid getting across, and actually a lot of people, either in the Israeli administration or in the Israeli populace, seem to believe that that's proper. And they use that as the moral justification for how good the Israeli military is, also for some other reasons. But when they say Israel is the most moral army in the world, part of that is coming from, we care so much about the populace on the other side. And yet, as we've spoken about, this is propping up the other side in a war where the other side are people who are trying to kill you. They're trying to destroy your whole country. And the international community knows that that's what Hamas wants, and that Hamas is the de facto government of this little microstate. So when they're pouring aid into Gaza, I know they're doing it with the rationale of, oh, we just care about the civilians, but none of them are under actually any illusions that Hamas is getting this. So they know that it's propping up Hamas and is allowing them to continue their fight against Israel, and will allow them to kill further Israeli soldiers, to continue to hold the Israeli hostages, and so on and so forth. So there's something just truly immoral about excuse me, about pouring food, but also fuel into Gaza right now. It's regarded as a kind of humanitarian tragedy, but then a war itself is a humanitarian tragedy. And yet, unless you're a real pacifist, there's an inconsistency with that position. And if you're a pacifist, that's just an immoral position by itself. So the assumption of this article is that it's proper to allow aid in, and is completely ignoring all the consequences of what allowing aid into Gaza is. And as we've said, it's improper to pour aid into your enemy whilst they're trying to kill you.
So look, we're almost out of time. We didn't make it through the whole article. It's in the description and in the live chat for people who want to read the rest of it, or think maybe we're leaving out the totally fair pro-Israel part of it. You can go ahead and do that. Look, the reality show today, when somebody suggested that we do a show about the video of the three Israeli girls, soldiers who were taken. It's a video that was taken by Hamas on October 7th. I said no. And then, upon further consideration, I thought, you know what, this is, people should see this. I understand why Israel decided to release this. But yeah, for those of you who intend to watch, and for those of you who share, we don't do trigger warnings lightly, but this is definitely something that is not going to be easy to watch. It's a 3 minute or 3 minute and something long video, but of course we will not we, but those on the show will be discussing it. I do encourage people to watch it, but just bear in mind it's not going to be easy viewing at all. Thanks, Morgan. Thanks, everybody, for watching. And the reality show starts in a couple of minutes.
Bye-bye.